They left him to die and came back to find everything they thought they owned gone. Claire thought she was coming home for Thanksgiving. Instead, she found a cruel note, an abandoned old man, and a secret her husband never expected her to uncover. What began as betrayal turned into an alliance between a dying stepfather and a woman his family discarded. Together, they exposed years of neglect, financial abuse, and lies buried beneath the family's polished surface. But the real twist? Claire didn't seek revenge. She sought justice and made sure no one would ever forget his name. Claire Bennett had expected the warmth of roasted turkey, not the cold silence of an empty house. Snow flurried outside the large bay window, feathering against the glass like shy ghosts. She dropped her suitcase in the foyer, the weight of sweet potatoes and cranberry sauce pressing against her hip from the grocery bags in her arms. Her boots left small, wet prints across the hardwood as she stepped deeper into the quiet. The note was waiting for her on the kitchen counter, scrawled hastily in Brady's blocky handwriting, folded once. No envelope. She unfolded it slowly, the edges already curled from the cold. Gone on a cruise with my ex. Take care of my stepdad. He needs you. Back Monday. B. Claire read it again, the words swimming slightly. Her hand tightened around the paper as something sank inside her, fast and cold. It was with his ex Hannah, the same Hannah who had been just a colleague. The same Hannah he had mentioned far too often these past few months. Behind her, a creak cut through the silence. "I take it he's not coming back until Monday?" a voice rasped. She turned sharply. At the kitchen threshold stood Victor Harmon, Brady's stepfather, leaning on a worn cane. His blue eyes were sharp, far too lucid for the mentally declining old man Brady had described over the years. He was dressed in a thick sweater and wool pants, slippers worn down at the heels. There was no frailty in his stare, only something appraising and oddly familiar. Claire swallowed. "No, he's not." Victor nodded as if confirming an expectation. "Left you with the dirty work, classic Brady move." Claire let out a shaky breath, trying to hold on to whatever thread of normalcy remained. We'd been planning Thanksgiving for weeks. His mother was supposed to host. Everyone was coming. Victor didn't respond right away. Instead, he shuffled to the refrigerator and retrieved a half-empty pitcher of water. His hands trembled slightly as he poured himself a glass. "They left Tuesday morning," he said. "Didn't even stock the fridge properly. Hope you brought groceries." Claire opened her mouth to reply, but nothing came out. Her fingers uncurled and the note fluttered onto the countertop like a broken wing. She sank into a kitchen chair, the cold from outside finally settling into her bones. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She pulled it out too fast, hopeful, but it wasn't Brady. An Instagram notification lit the screen. She tapped it. It was a photo. Brady on a cruise ship, champagne flute in hand, one arm wrapped around Hannah's waist. Elaine, his mother, sat in the background in a sundress, sipping a cocktail. Everyone smiling. Everyone glowing. The caption read, "New Beginnings, Caribbean Getaway with Brady Bennett and Fam." Claire stared at the word fam as if it had sprouted thorns. Her breath caught in her chest, and for a long moment, the only sound in the room was the low hum of the refrigerator and Victor sipping from his glass like nothing had happened. "They've been planning this the whole time," she whispered. Victor lowered his glass. "Hannah's been calling here for months. Pretty voice, laugh like a dying raccoon." Claire looked at him sharply. "You knew?" He tapped the side of his head. "I know a lot of things they think I've forgotten." Her heart pounded. Her hand went to her purse, fingers fumbling for her phone again, this time for their bank app. When it opened, her breath stopped. 3 days ago, $5,200, 0 cents withdrawn. Their entire savings. The money meant for the down payment on the house. the house Brady had said they'd shop for after the holidays. Claire didn't realize she was shaking until Victor placed a hand on her shoulder. "Welcome to the club," he said quietly. And Claire understood, perhaps for the first time, that she was not the only one Brady had discarded. Claire's grip tightened around her phone as she stared at the transaction. The room was still, yet inside her chest something had ruptured. Clean, sharp, irreversible. Her marriage wasn't just breaking. It had already been replaced. She set the phone down carefully, as though the act of doing so might keep her hands from betraying the trembling that had spread through her arms. "They've done this to you too?" she said, eyes still fixed on the counter. Victor let out a breath, not quite a sigh, more like the slow exhale of someone who'd been waiting a long time for that recognition. "Elaine used to tell people I was forgetful," he murmured, lowering himself into the chair opposite her. "Then she started handling my prescriptions, then the heating bills, then my account access." Claire blinked. "They say it's all for your care," he continued. "Meanwhile, they dial the thermostat to 62, skip my specialist appointments, and pretend a Big Mac is dinner." Claire pressed her fingers to her temples. "Why didn't you say anything?" "To who? Brady?" Victor gave a dry laugh. "He's been too busy chasing promotions and blondes to care about an old man." Claire felt a sick twist in her stomach. The kitchen around them was still cluttered with a heap of containers, sink half full of unwashed dishes. No sign of Thanksgiving. No sign of family. Her phone lit up again. This time it was a call from Leah, her best friend from college, probably calling to wish her a happy holiday. Claire silenced it. There were no words to explain this yet. Victor stood slowly and shuffled to the pantry. "There's soup. Probably expired, but it's something." She stood up, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "No, we deserve better than canned soup." Victor raised an eyebrow. "I'm going to the store," she said, grabbing her purse. "I'll find a turkey breast, something green. We're going to have a real dinner. Maybe the last decent Thanksgiving in this house." Victor studied her, then gave a faint nod. "Haven't had a home-cooked meal in months." The wind had picked up by the time Claire reached the car. She turned the heat on full blast, but the chill followed her in. As she drove, her mind spiraled. Had her entire marriage been a placeholder until Brady found something shinier? Had she missed the signs or simply chosen not to see them? The grocery store was quiet, its aisles half empty, the turkey shelf nearly picked clean. Still, she managed a small breast, some potatoes, a bag of green beans. There was a display of whipped cream near the checkout, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she grabbed a tub. When she returned, the kitchen smelled faintly of lemon cleanser. Victor had cleared the counter. On the table was a neat stack of papers. Bank statements, medical records, printouts with yellow highlighter and post-its. "What's this?" she asked, setting the groceries down. "Evidence," Victor replied. His voice was steady. "I've been keeping track." Claire sat slowly. The documents were meticulous. Dates, dosages, receipt transfers from his account labeled "for care," with nothing to show for them. One file labeled RX Elaine listed missed prescriptions. Another included phone logs of Brady's calls, or lack thereof. "You were preparing for this?" Claire said, awe blooming beneath the anger. Victor looked at her with eyes that had outlived disappointment. "I was preparing for the moment someone would finally care enough to listen." Claire's throat tightened. "Why me?" "Because," he said quietly, tapping the envelope at the bottom of the stack, "you've been used just like I have, and I don't have much time left." He slid the envelope toward her. It was thick, sealed. "My real will and trust, not the one Elaine thinks exists." Claire stared at it, her fingers hovering just above. Victor leaned back, a small smile playing at his lips. "Shall we begin?" he asked again, and this time Claire nodded. The study had once been Victor's sanctuary. A room lined with walnut bookshelves, the faint scent of pipe tobacco still lingering in the wood. But over the years, Elaine had stripped it of its soul. The books had been replaced by yoga mats and scented candles. The leather chair swapped for a flimsy meditation stool. What was once masculine and ordered had become sterile, as if Victor himself had been erased. Claire stood in the doorway, her arms folded. Victor was already inside, tapping the baseboard below one of the bookshelves. She said, "It ruined her energy flow," he muttered. "What it ruined was my dignity." A soft click sounded as a panel gave way. From behind the molding, Victor pulled out a weatherproof document box, scratched and heavy. He placed it on the desk and looked up at her. "You might want to sit down." Claire moved slowly, taking the side chair, one of the few things that hadn't been replaced with Elaine's pastel minimalism. Victor flipped open the box. Inside were meticulously organized folders, each labeled in bold block print. Banking, personal, medical, records, RX tracking, beneficiary, final. "These are originals," he said, "not copies. The real files. The ones they think don't exist." Claire reached for the medical.cords folder first. The first page was a diagnosis, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Date, August 12, 3 months ago. Her chest tightened. "They knew this?" "Oh yes," Victor said. "Elaine was with me when I got the news. Didn't cry, didn't even blink. Just asked the doctor if I'd need round-the-clock care or if hospice could manage it remotely." Claire's hands trembled slightly as she flipped through oncologist notes, prescriptions, scan results. It was all there. Undeniable. Bleak. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "Don't be. Just understand what kind of people we're dealing with." Victor opened another folder and handed her a pharmacy report. "This is what I'm supposed to be taking. Now check the bathroom cabinet." She hesitated, then stood and walked down the hall. The bathroom was clinical and cold, the mirrors spotted, cabinet neatly arranged with prescription bottles. But as she compared the dosages and refill dates with the records, her blood turned icy. The pain medication was nearly full, despite being refilled twice. The enzymes he needed to digest food were only half used, when he should have gone through several bottles. One anti-nausea med was missing entirely. She returned to the study, holding the bottles in her hands. "They've been rationing your meds." Victor nodded grimly. "1 pill instead of 2, skipping doses when no one's watching. Hospice appointments canceled because he doesn't like strangers in the house." Elaine called it cost-saving. Claire placed the bottles on the desk with deliberate care. "That's not just neglect. That's abuse." Victor's voice dropped. "It's what happens when people decide you're already gone." He pulled a small leather notebook from under a stack of folders and handed it to her. Inside were handwritten entries, dates, times, symptoms, missed appointments, overdraft alerts from his account. "Why did you document all of this?" she asked. He gave her a long, level look. "Because I knew no one would believe me unless I could prove it, and because I was waiting for someone with a spine to show up." Claire sat back, the weight of everything pressing into her. This was no longer about a ruined Thanksgiving. It was no longer even about a failed marriage. It was about justice. Victor picked up a worn envelope, unsealed it, and slid its contents across the desk. "My real will and the trust paperwork, everything Elaine and Brady think they're inheriting? They're not. I've already moved the assets, but I need a witness. Someone I trust." Claire stared at the signature at the bottom of the document, Victor Harmon. Then, just below that line was another, left blank. "For you," he said softly, "if you'll have it." Claire's fingers hovered for a moment, then reached for the pen. She didn't hesitate. Victor's bedroom had been converted long ago, but not with comfort in mind. A cold, unused hospital bed stood in the corner beneath a framed print of autumn leaves, probably Elaine's idea of serenity. Victor, however, had claimed the twin bed on the opposite wall, where the blankets bore the shape of someone who still resisted surrender. Claire stood near the desk, the folder of documents tucked under her arm. "Is there anyone else who knows about this?" "About your real will?" Victor eased himself onto the mattress. "Only Patricia, my attorney. I contacted her last month, told her to hold everything until I said the word. She's good, sharp, doesn't flinch easily." Claire nodded slowly. "You trust her?" "With my life, which, granted, doesn't carry much time left." He smiled faintly. "But yes, she knows what's at stake." Victor leaned to the side and opened the bottom drawer of the desk. He retrieved another file, thinner, marked in red pen. Family communication. Inside were printed screenshots, dated voicemails, and notes in Victor's precise hand. Messages from Brady, mostly short, dismissive. Occasional texts from Elaine, each more clinical than the last. "Will be by Sunday if you're still up to company. Need access to your online banking again. Insurance is asking questions. Make sure to take your pills. Brady says your memory's slipping." Claire shook her head. They were laying the groundwork. Victor's eyes gleamed. "Elaine's been at this for years. She thinks if she paints me as incompetent long enough, no one will question it when she takes everything." "Well, she underestimated you," Claire said, flipping through the pages. "And she sure as hell underestimated me." Victor's grin cracked across his weathered face. "Now that's the spirit." Claire sat down beside the desk and opened her phone. "We need a timeline, something visual. I can map out everything. I used to organize exhibits for design clients, pulling threads together." She started creating folders: medical neglect, financial transfers, social media evidence. She uploaded the photos she'd taken earlier of the cruise posts, the prescription bottles, and even the note Brady left on the counter. Victor watched her work. "You're good at this." Claire's hands never stopped moving. "No one ever thought to ask what I was good at. They just decided I should stay quiet." "They told me the same thing," Victor murmured. "When I married Elaine, everyone said she was a vision, that she'd saved me. I was a widower, well off, vulnerable. I thought I'd found company again. Instead, I funded her lifestyle and lost my voice." Claire's typing slowed. "Did you love her?" Victor was silent for a moment. "I loved the idea of not being alone." Claire looked over. For the first time, he seemed smaller, not weak, but human. The anger inside her tempered into something deeper. Solidarity. She stood and adjusted the curtains to let in a little more light. "We'll need photos, video too. If this ends up in court, perception matters." Victor chuckled dryly. "I'm dying, not delusional. I'll do what it takes to even put on a show." "We won't have to exaggerate much," Claire said, her voice quiet but clear. "They already wrote their own story. We're just going to let them see how it ends." She picked up her phone and opened the camera. "May I?" Victor nodded. She snapped a few photos of the room, careful to capture the hospital bed in the background, the half-used pill bottles on the nightstand, the stack of documents on the desk. Victor smoothed his sweater and sat straighter. "You think this will work?" "I don't think," Claire said, lowering the phone. "I know." He leaned back against the headboard, watching her like a man seeing daylight after a long winter. "Then let's begin," he said again, and this time Claire smiled. "Yes," she whispered. "Let's." Claire stood in the center of Victor's bedroom, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. The hospice bed gleamed under the overhead light, spotless and untouched. Until now. Today, it would become the stage. She rolled the oxygen tank into place beside the bed, just as James, Patricia's brother, had shown her that morning. He was a retired prop designer who now ran a medical supply company in upstate Massachusetts, and he had arrived in an unmarked van with more gear than she knew what to do with. Now the room was a collage of carefully curated suffering, saline bags, empty, adhesive EKG pads, a monitoring screen that blinked though it wasn't connected to anything. "Good angle from this side," Victor said from his armchair, watching her with a critical eye. "Shadow makes my cheekbones look hollower." Claire chuckled despite herself. "You've missed your calling as a stage actor." Victor gave a weak smile. Dying man's got to stay relevant somehow. She helped him onto the bed, arranging his thin blanket. "Just so." He removed his glasses and let his hair fall messily against his forehead. Without the structure of his usual posture, Victor looked frail, authentically frail. His eyes, no longer shielded, seemed to retreat deeper into his face. Claire dimmed the lights and took out her phone. "Ready?" "Make it dramatic," Victor murmured. "They like guilt in high resolution." She snapped 3 photos, one of him lying still, another with the oxygen mask on, and one where his eyes fluttered slightly open as if caught between sleep and something worse. Then she passed the phone to him. "My turn." Victor gestured for her to sit in the chair beside the bed. She tousled her hair, took off her makeup with a tissue and pulled on one of Brady's oversized college sweatshirts. The sleeves fell past her wrists. She looked young, exhausted, displaced. Victor took several shots. Claire asleep in the chair, head resting on her hand. Claire checking a bottle of pills, brows furrowed. Claire reaching to adjust the IV line that didn't lead anywhere. "Perfect," he said, handing her back the phone. She opened her messages and selected Melissa, Brady's sister, the only family member who had texted to check in since they left. Claire sent one of the photos, followed by a brief note. "Victor had a bad night. Fever's up. Managing the best I can. Will update if things get worse." It was clinical but soft, calculated to trigger either guilt or curiosity. "Within minutes," Melissa replied. "Oh no. Poor Uncle Vic. Keep me posted. Let me know if Mom needs to come back early." Claire raised her eyes. Hook set. Victor's laugh was a dry cough. "Knew she'd be the weak link. She's got more conscience than the rest combined, though that's not saying much." The next step was harder. Claire dialed Brady. Straight to voicemail. She tried again, and then one more time, before recording the message she had rehearsed a dozen times in her head. "Brady, it's me again," she said, injecting just enough quiver to sound afraid but composed. "Victor's condition is worse than expected. The hospice nurse is concerned about his breathing. I really think you should call me back." She paused. "I really need your support right now." Victor, watching from the bed, gave her a silent thumbs up. They repeated the routine 3 more times that day. Different voicemails, escalating urgency. Claire added small variations, subtle cracks in her voice, longer pauses, a shaky breath at the end. Each message was recorded on Victor's backup phone for safekeeping. She also started a medical log, backdating a few entries to establish consistency. Temperature spikes, nausea, shallow breathing. It was disturbingly easy to construct a steady narrative of decline. "You should have been an actress," Victor commented as she printed labels for fake prescription vials. Claire didn't look up. "I prefer Archivist of Injustice." Victor chuckled again, "and here I thought I was the only one who wanted revenge." Claire slipped a photo into the medical folder. "Not revenge," she said. "Proof." The knock came just as Claire was finishing her 4th fake log entry for the day. She froze, pen in midair, heart thudding once before settling into a dull ache. Victor lifted an eyebrow from his perch on the bed. "That'll be Edith." Claire wiped her hands on her jeans and crossed to the door. On the porch stood a petite woman in a tan overcoat and knitted hat, holding a casserole dish covered with foil. Her white hair curled neatly beneath her cap. and her cheeks were pink from the wind. "Claire, right? I'm Edith Peterson, from next door," she said, voice warm but sharp. "Figured you two might be needing dinner. Looking after Victor's no small task, I imagine." Claire blinked, stunned by the offer. "That's incredibly kind. Please, come in." Inside, Edith moved with quiet confidence, setting the dish on the counter and scanning the room. She noticed the medical setup without comment, but with eyes that missed nothing. They sat with coffee at the table while Victor dozed lightly in the bedroom, his breathing even and slow. "I've been watching that family for years," Edith said finally, her voice lower now, conspiratorial. "The way they treat that man, disgraceful." Claire's throat tightened. "He's always been good to them, especially Brady," Edith went on. "Paid for his college, bought him his first car, never saw Victor treat that boy as anything less than a son." Claire looked down at her coffee. "They left me a note, just a note, told me to stay and take care of him while they went on vacation." Edith's mouth pulled into a hard line. "Shameful, absolutely shameful. Last month Victor fell in the front yard. It was my Harold who helped him up. Brady was inside watching football. Didn't even open the door when we knocked." Claire let the silence stretch, unsure whether her next words were invitation or confession. "They think he's dying this week. They just didn't want to deal with it." Edith's eyes met hers and held. "I figured as much. That's why I came, and I'll spread the word to the others. He deserves visitors, people who care, even if his own family doesn't." By the end of the evening, Claire had added Edith's visit to the folder. Notes on what she'd said, the date, time, even the temperature outside. Everything would count. Over the next 2 days, neighbors trickled in. Mr. Lund brought soup. An older couple, the Simmonses, dropped off flowers and a card. Each one had a story. A moment when they'd seen Victor alone, overheard Elaine snapping at him, witnessed Brady ignoring him. Claire logged them all. Dates, observations, direct quotes. On Saturday morning, Patricia returned with a briefcase full of documents and a notary named Thomas in tow. Victor, dressed in his best cardigan, looked tired but alert. "I'm ready," he said simply. They gathered at the dining room table. Claire brought tea. In the privacy of the moment, Victor signed the final transfers. Accounts placed in new trusts, power of attorney granted to Claire, updated medical directives. Claire signed as witness, Thomas notarized. As Victor signed the last document, Mr. Collins' words from the bank a week earlier came back to Claire. "Your stepson was asking about your accounts." Victor hadn't flinched then, just nodded and said, "Always planning ahead, that boy." Now, watching him press his shaky signature on the final page, Claire understood what planning ahead truly meant. "You sure about all this?" Patricia asked gently. Victor leaned back, eyes gleaming with purpose. "They left me to die, but they'll have to live with the truth." Claire stood beside him, steady and calm, as Patricia slid the documents back into her case. The wheels were in motion. By evening, a video call would come, and with it, the first fracture in Brady's well-constructed illusion. The first sound Claire heard was the car doors slamming shut. 1, 2, then a third. Then came laughter, muffled but unmistakable, followed by the scrape of suitcase wheels against concrete. She moved into position by the fireplace, her black dress ironed smooth, her hair pinned back. The house smelled faintly of rosemary and wax, though the casserole from Mrs. Peterson remained untouched on the counter. They were back. Brady's voice pierced the silence. "Honey, we're home." The front door burst open, and for a moment the house was flooded with sunshine, boot steps, and a clatter of duty-free shopping bags. Elaine breezed in first, sunglasses perched atop her head, a wide straw hat slung over her arm. Melissa followed, still flushed from the sun, and behind them, Hannah Hunt, her blonde hair tangled from wind, laughed too loudly at something Brady had whispered. The laughter died instantly when they saw Claire. She stood perfectly still, hands clasped in front of her, her face unreadable. Brady blinked. "Claire? What's with the—" He motioned vaguely to her outfit. "What is this, a funeral?" Elaine's face darkened. "Where's Victor? Is he napping?" Claire's voice was quiet but resolute. "Victor passed away Saturday night." The shopping bags in Brady's arms dropped to the floor. Hannah took a step back. Melissa's mouth parted in a small gasp. Elaine didn't move. "Excuse me?" "He died peacefully in his sleep," Claire continued, her gaze never wavering. "The funeral was yesterday afternoon. It was well attended. Many of the neighbors came." Brady's features contorted. Shock first, then anger, and beneath it all, something calculating. "You held the funeral without us," he demanded, "without his family." Claire tilted her head. "I left multiple messages. I called, I texted. Melissa even replied. You all chose not to come." "Back." Melissa stepped forward slowly. "I told them you called. I said he looked bad." Elaine waved her off. "This is insane. Victor would never—" Claire cut her off. "He left a letter. For all of you." She walked over to the coffee table and picked up a cream-colored envelope. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably Victor's. "They're his words, not mine." She handed the letter to Brady, who stared at it like it might catch fire. Slowly, he unfolded it. The others crowded around. Claire stepped back and watched them read. Victor's voice lived in every line. "By the time you read this, I will be gone. Not that my absence will likely inconvenience you. You've made it quite clear that I was more burden than family in these last few years." Brady's jaw tensed. Elaine's face paled. Melissa's hands trembled as she read. "The holidays passed in silence. My medications delayed, appointments canceled, my name spoken in the same breath as waiting for the old man to die. I write this not from bitterness, but clarity. In my final days, the only kindness I received came from someone you considered disposable." Claire stood straighter as their eyes darted toward her. "Claire gave me dignity. You gave me indifference. And in the end, that was the difference that mattered." Silence fell when Brady folded the letter and placed it back on the table. No one spoke, even Hannah. He kept her eyes down. Claire's voice broke the stillness. "There's more you need to see." She turned toward the television, already cued with video Victor had recorded just days ago. "Wait," Elaine said sharply. "Did he change his will?" Claire didn't flinch. "You should hear his words first." And with that, she pressed play. The screen lit up with Victor's face, drawn, pale, but steady. He sat upright in bed, the oxygen cannula tucked beneath his nose, his blue eyes trained directly on the camera. "If you're watching this," his voice began, "then I've already gone." Elaine exhaled loudly, crossing her arms. Brady shifted uncomfortably on his feet. Claire stayed silent, her eyes locked on their faces more than the scream. "I want you to know," Victor continued, "that I made every decision in this video of sound mind. 2 independent physicians confirmed that, and so did Patricia Winters, my attorney, who you'll be hearing from shortly." Victor's voice didn't tremble. It hardened. "I've spent the last several years watching my family treat me like an obstacle. I was told to be quiet about my pain. I was told hospice was too expensive. I was told to cut down on medications to save money. I listened as my stepson joked to friends that I'd be dead before the next election. I watched my wife, Elaine, drain my accounts under the guise of care. While I lived in a home with the heat barely on and empty cupboards," Elaine muttered. "He's exaggerating." Claire didn't respond. Neither did Victor. He continued on screen. I kept records, he said. Dates, prescriptions, missed appointments. Every time I was left alone for days while they vacationed or hosted parties without me. And when I needed help most, when the cancer began to take hold, Brady and Elaine decided to go on a cruise and leave me here with a woman they barely speak to. And she, the one they underestimated, is the reason I was not alone in the end. Brady scoffed and turned away from the screen. This is all a setup. But Claire remained composed. She walked over to the sideboard and picked up a thick folder, dropping it on the dining table with a satisfying thud. Then perhaps you'd like to go through the evidence? Elaine narrowed her eyes. What is that? Bank statements, pharmacy logs, testimonies from your neighbors, medical records, voicemails, screenshots of your vacation posts while Victor declined here alone. Claire opened the folder, flipping pages with deliberate calm. Here's the withdrawal you made from his account, Brady. $5,200, the day before you left, labeled as insurance reimbursement. It wasn't. Melissa hovered near the table, face drained. Is that why the house was so cold last winter? Claire didn't look at her. She pressed play on her tablet again. Another video loaded. This time a recording of the FaceTime call between her and Melissa where Victor had appeared barely conscious. Elaine snatched her purse. We don't have to stay for this. You may want to, came a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned. Patricia Winters entered with calm precision, her silver-gray coat still buttoned, briefcase in hand. Behind her was Thomas, the notary, nodding politely. I believe this is the part where we discuss Victor Harmon's last will and testament. Brady tried to compose himself, brushing invisible lint from his shirt. We were just getting to that. Patricia walked over to the table, placing a legal envelope down. Good, because it's quite clear. She adjusted her glasses and began to read. Victor Harmon has bequeathed the entirety of his estate to Claire Bennett, with additional allocations to the Elder Justice Foundation, Silver Voices Legal Aid, and the Brattleboro Hospice Network. Elaine gasped. Brady stumbled back. Hannah's lips parted in shock. Only Melissa remained frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief. The will cites medical neglect and abandonment as cause for the disinheritance of Mr. Harmon's immediate family members. It is signed, notarized, and legally filed. Brady's voice cracked. That's not possible. She was manipulated. She's been orchestrating this. You're welcome to contest it, Patricia replied smoothly. But with the evidence we've compiled and witnesses who can speak to your treatment of Victor, you'll be wasting your time. Claire closed the folder and looked directly at him. You left him to die, she said. He left you with nothing. And in the silence that followed, no one dared argue. Brady hadn't moved since Patricia's announcement. He stood near the dining table, pale and rigid, as if trying to calculate a version of events where this wasn't real. Elaine was the first to find her voice again, and it came out sharp enough to slice steel. This is fraud, she snapped. We'll fight it. Victor was not in his right mind. Patricia, already packing away the documents with mechanical precision, didn't even look up. Victor's mental capacity was certified by 2 independent physicians. You'll find their signed assessments attached to the will, filed and time-stamped. Elaine's gaze shot toward Claire. You did this. You manipulated him while he was sick? Claire met her stare with quiet finality. No, I took care of him when you wouldn't. Brady stepped forward, eyes narrowing. This house is mine, Dad said. Victor promised nothing, Patricia interjected, shutting her briefcase. And the deed to this property isn't under his name. It belongs to a holding company he established years ago, ironically to protect it from mismanagement. Claire walked over to the sideboard and pulled open the bottom drawer. From it, she retrieved a folder and laid it flat in front of him. Here's the deed, registered to a company called Windmere Holdings. Victor was its sole beneficiary. Victor's hands hovered over the folder like he didn't dare touch it. "That's not possible," he muttered. "Believe what you want," Claire said, her voice low. "But your name was never on it." The silence that followed was shattered by Melissa. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the room like a bell. "What about our college funds?" Claire turned toward her, slowly. "Victor provided $80,000, 0 cents to Brady to establish education trusts for you and Eric. He tried to enjoy it again, he thought. It was transferred 2 years ago." Melissa blinked. "What?" Patricia spoke again, her voice professional but not unkind. "We found no trace of those funds in any trust account, but there was a transfer into a personal checking account belonging to Brady around the same time, coinciding with a down payment on the new Audi parked in your driveway." Melissa took a step back. "You spent it?" Brady's eyes darted between them, a dozen excuses rushing behind his lips, none of them strong enough to be spoken aloud. Elaine looked ready to pounce. "We didn't agree to any of this. You had no right to change the will." "Actually," Patricia said, closing her briefcase with a click, "Victor had every right, and he exercised it. Quietly, thoroughly." Hannah, who had remained silent through the entire encounter, took a hesitant step toward the door. Her sun-kissed skin now looked drained of color. "I didn't know he was sick," she said softly. "Brady told me he was stable, that Claire had it handled." Claire didn't even bother responding. The woman had been an accessory to abandonment at best, a willing participant at worst. Either way, she had no place here now. The room, once tense with confrontation, now simmered in shame. Claire stood in the eye of the storm, strangely calm. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't needed to. Victor's voice had done the work. His letter, his video, his decisions, all had spoken louder than outrage ever could. Claire moved to the fireplace and gently picked up a framed photo from the mantel. It was one she hadn't noticed before. Victor, in a gray sweater, standing beneath a tree in full fall color. His smile was small, real. No one else was in the frame. She turned back toward the others. "You'll receive official notice within the week. Until then, I suggest you leave. This house is no longer yours." Elaine opened her mouth, but Patricia raised a hand. "She's right, legally, emotionally, morally." Brady stood frozen, staring at the photo in Claire's hand. Claire set it down with care. "I think we're done here." The hallway was colder than Claire remembered. Or maybe it was just the silence that followed Brady as he trailed behind her, no longer furious, but pleading. "Claire," he said softly, almost sheepish, "please, can we talk?" She didn't slow down. She reached the front door and placed her hand on the knob, not yet opening it. "I made mistakes," he continued, voice trembling just enough to mimic remorse. "I got scared, okay? The money, the cruise. It wasn't what it looked like." Claire turned, slowly. The light from the hallway hit her face like a blade, sharp angles, no softness left. "You left your stepfather to die," she said. "You drained our savings, you lied to my face while you slept next to me at night. I think it's exactly what it looked like." Brady stepped closer, but not too close. His bravado from earlier had cracked wide open. "I didn't know how to fix it. I thought if I gave it some time. If I came back before the end, made it right somehow." She pulled her wedding ring off her finger and pressed it into his hand. It left a faint indentation on her skin, one that vanished as quickly as the warmth between them had. "You were too late," she said. "And now you don't get anything. Not this house, not his legacy, not me." Claire reached into her pocket and placed the keys to their shared apartment on top of the ring. He looked down at them like they were foreign objects. "You can have the couch," she added dryly. I won't need it where I'm going." Brady's voice changed, something darker pushing through. "You think this is over? You think you're walking away with everything?" She tilted her head, eyes steady. "No, Brady. I'm walking away with the—" "Yes. Only thing that matters. Peace. You'll be left explaining how you lost everything to a dying man and a woman you called irrelevant." The silence between them hung like smoke. He couldn't hold her gaze. As Claire opened the front door, Patricia stepped forward from the walkway, her presence as precise as always. "Everything okay?" she asked. Claire nodded. "It's done." Behind them, Elaine was shouting in the living room, her voice shrill, demanding that Melissa call a lawyer, screaming about property and betrayal. Hannah had already vanished. Claire assumed out the side door, taking the coward's exit. Claire stepped outside, the cold air a slap of relief. Patricia followed. "I'll have the transition documents filed by the end of the week," Patricia said, already unbuttoning her coat. "Do you want to stay here, or would you prefer the hotel I reserved?" Claire looked back at the house, now just a shell of tension and greed. "I'll take the hotel." Patricia nodded. "Smart." They walked toward the car. From across the street, Claire noticed movement on a neighboring porch. Mrs. Peterson was watering a potted plant even though the soil was frozen. She looked up and raised her hand. Claire returned the way, this time with something that almost resembled a smile. As they reached the car, Claire paused and glanced over her shoulder. Through the open doorway, she could see Brady standing alone in the hallway, staring at the empty space where Victor's coat used to hang. She didn't say goodbye. Some things didn't deserve ceremony. When the car pulled away, Claire didn't look back again. Not at the house, not at the shattered family inside. Instead, she looked ahead, toward the clean slate, the silent room waiting in the hotel, and the first real night of sleep she might have in years. The hotel room was quiet in a way that didn't feel lonely, just clean, still. And Claire set her suitcase down on the bench at the foot of the bed, taking a breath that filled her chest for the first time in days. There were no raised voices behind closed doors, no silent judgments waiting at dinner tables, no medical documents stacked like unspoken accusations. Just a view of a modest city skyline, a lamp with warm light, and a mini fridge stocked with things she could finally eat without guilt. She kicked off her shoes and sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers brushing the envelope she'd brought with her from Victor's desk. Inside were two things: the final letter he'd never had time to read aloud, and the recipe handwritten on an old index card in fading ink for Martha's peaches and cream, the same dessert he'd asked for the morning before he slipped away. Claire stared at the card a moment before slipping it into her purse. There was one more thing she needed to do before she could move forward. The drive to the cemetery was short. The sky had turned a soft pewter, and the air smelled of snow. Claire walked past rows of headstones until she reached the one she'd chosen with Patricia just 3 days earlier. Victor Harmon, 19452023. A life lived in silence. A voice remembered. She knelt beside the stone and set down a small container. Fresh peaches, sliced carefully into thin crescents, topped with cream, just the way he'd described. "I found them," she said softly, "at a market near the airport. They weren't great, but I know you'd have appreciated the effort." The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang. Maybe from a church, maybe just the sound of metal on metal in the cold. Claire placed a folded paper beside the dessert. It was a copy of Victor's will, not for legality, but for memory, a symbol, a declaration. She stood, brushing snow from her coat. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "You weren't forgotten, and you won't be." Back at the hotel, she made tea and opened her laptop for the first time since the night everything changed. Her desktop was still organized the way she'd left it. Freelance client folders, half-completed branding templates, invoices from a world that felt light years away. But now, something new. A folder labeled Victor, the record. She clicked it open. Inside were scanned documents, testimony clips, audio recordings, images of prescriptions and accounts, all sorted, color-coded, arranged for clarity and evidence. She wasn't sure what she would do with it yet. A blog, a podcast, a book, something more formal? What she did know was this: Victor's story would not be buried with him, not just because of the betrayal he endured, but because of the quiet dignity he reclaimed in his final days, and because somewhere out there, someone else was being told to stay quiet. Someone else was being written out of their own life. Claire wouldn't let them stay invisible. She opened a blank document and began typing. Chapter 1. The Note on the Counter. She paused only to glance toward the nightstand, where the small photo frame now sat Victor beneath the autumn tree, a quiet smile on his face. Claire nodded once, then returned to the keyboard. It was time to begin again. A week later, Claire found herself sitting at a long, polished oak table inside the office of the Elder Justice Foundation. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Boston harbor, the winter sun glinting off the frozen waves. Across from her sat two women in navy blazers, both taking notes as Claire spoke. "And that's when I found the bottle," Claire said, sliding a printed photo across the table. Victor's nearly full pain medication, date-stamped and untouched despite a fresh refill. He never even complained, just endured it. The women exchanged a glance, then nodded with the practiced gravity of people who'd heard similar stories too many times. But even among them, Victor's stood out. "And you documented all of this?" one of them asked. Claire opened the black binder she had brought, sections neatly tabbed, color-coded, cross-referenced. "Every message, every bank withdrawal, every missing meal. It's all in here." The older woman, Helen, leaned forward. "Would you consider sharing his story at our annual summit? Survivor testimony changes laws. It opens funding. It moves people in ways reports never do." Claire hesitated, fingers tracing the edge of the binder. "I'm not the survivor." "He was." Helen smiled gently. "Sometimes it takes someone who stayed to tell the story of the one who didn't." Claire looked down, then gave a quiet nod. "Yes, I'll do it." Outside, the wind picked up, sweeping across the harbor as if echoing something long held in silence. Later that day, back at the hotel, Claire returned to her laptop. She uploaded a short clip, just a few seconds of Victor's voice from one of their recorded conversations. Nothing incriminating, just the quiet wisdom in his tone as he said, "The world doesn't need more rage, it needs memory. Memory and action." She paired it with a caption and posted it to a private blog she'd created days earlier, unsure then what it might become. But now it had a name, Unforgotten. Within an hour, strangers had already found it. Began to appear, stories from daughters, nephews, neighbors, people who had watched the quiet cruelty of neglect erode someone they loved. That night, as Claire packed her suitcase, preparing to move into a short-term apartment arranged by Patricia, she paused beside the window. The city lights blinked like distant promises, and somewhere out there, the Bennetts were scrambling, filing appeals that would fail, calling lawyers who wouldn't return their... Elaine had attempted a press interview the day before, painting herself as a victim of manipulation. But Victor's documents had already reached the reporter first. The article headline read, "Elder Justice Reclaimed How One Man Fought Back with His Final Breath." Claire folded the newspaper and slipped it into her bag. The next morning she drove to Windermere, the quiet Vermont town where Victor's untouched lakeside property waited, one he had purchased in secret years ago and left to Claire in the trust. The house was small, cedar-framed, hugged by pines and mist. It smelled of dust and lake water and something warm underneath, like the promise of healing. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. No echoes of past arguments, no resentment in the walls, just wood floors and silence. She opened the windows, let in the winter air, and breathed. Claire didn't need revenge. She didn't want to punish them further. The truth had already done what fury never could. Victor was gone. But he had left her something bigger than inheritance. He had left her voice, and now, finally, she would use it. Thank you for staying with Claire's story until the end. This wasn't just a story about betrayal or inheritance. It was about dignity, about finding your voice when others try to silence it, and about honoring those who were never truly seen until it was too late. To anyone who has ever felt discarded by the very people who should have stood by you, you are not alone. Sometimes, justice doesn't roar. It arrives quietly, in signatures, in silence, in survival. If Victor's story moved you, share it. Speak his name. Let others know that silence doesn't mean surrender, and the forgotten still have power. And if you have your own story to tell, tell it, because memory is resistance and truth is legacy. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.